What's up, y'all? So, as we all know, or for those of us who may have been asleep for the last 2 days, Donald Trump has been elected our 47th president of the United States of America. He will take office on January 20th, 2025. Me being a black American, I wanted to do my due diligence and let my community know, some things that we could look forward to as Donald Trump takes office, because whether you voted for him or you didn't vote for him, whether you want him to be president, whether you don't want him to be president, one thing we all must acknowledge is that he is our next president and that we are going to have to deal with it for the next 4 years. So, throughout this video, I'll be giving an unbiased perspective on Trump's policies and the expectations that we should have as Black Americans, minorities, and even majorities living in America while he is president. All right, so first on the list to expect from Donald Trump as our 47th president is, let's go over some economic policy expectations. So under his first term, we saw tax cuts that he argued would stimulate the economy. To note, many critics said that these cuts disproportionately benefited the wealthy and large corporations. A second Trump presidency might continue or even expand those tax policies, potentially leading to more wealth concentration. So what does that mean for Black America? For Black communities, this could mean fewer resources for public programs that support low-income and working-class individuals, which could impact jobs, housing, and business support. At the same time, Trump has pushed for initiatives like opportunity zones, which aim to stimulate investment in low-income areas. Supporters argue that these could help Black neighborhoods, but critics have pointed out that the benefits sometimes don't reach the residents in need. So now let's move on to education. So this could be another critical area to watch, especially if you are a Black American or a minority. Trump has voiced support for school choice, which includes charter schools and private school vouchers. While some see this as empowering families with more options, others argue that it diverts from funding public schools, which serve a large number of Black students. Trump has also pushed back against federal oversight on student debt relief and financial aid increases. If this trend continues, there might be fewer federal options to assist with student loan debt, which is significant in the Black community. His approach to education and student loans reflect a preference for limiting federal government involvement, alongside some policies likely to reduce student debt. On the campaign trail, he's voiced interest in eliminating the Department of Education. He wants to transfer its responsibilities to the states themselves. His platform also mentions promoting alternatives to four-year degrees, like trade programs and vocational training, which could lower education costs overall. But in contrast, he has not proposed specific plans for broad student loan forgiveness. His stance has mostly been critical of the Biden administration's debt relief initiatives, which he called unconstitutional. His approach aligns with conservative priorities, emphasizing personal responsibility and reduced federal intervention in education training. So, in conclusion for that, while his policies may offer pathways for lower cost education alternatives, he's not expected to support a large-scale student loan forgiveness program once he's reelected. His administration may also attempt to decrease regulations on for-profit institutions, building on his past efforts to roll back the Obama-era protections aimed at curbing aggressive recruitment and loan policies by those institutions. Criminal justice and policing. Criminal justice is obviously a major concern for Black America, minority America, and even some parts of white America. In his first term, Trump supported the First Step Act, which was a bipartisan effort that reduced prison sentences for certain federal offenses. However, he's also taken a tough on crime stance and has called for stronger police funding. During his last campaign, Trump made it clear that he opposed movements that aim to reduce police budgets, and he has sometimes painted Black Lives Matter protests in a negative light. So, just to go over that, there's Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter protests. So we've also heard Trump have a disdain towards protests in general as well. So a Trump presidency would mean possibly more aggressive policing policies with a focus on law and order, which might lead to more tension between Black communities and law enforcement. So I went ahead and looked deeper into what he meant by law and order, as well as this tough on crime stance. And so his tough on crime stance centers on reasserting aggressive law enforcement tactics and expanding punitive measures across the criminal justice system. He has proposed significantly scaling up federal prosecutorial power and advocating for maximum sentences. Trump also intends to reverse recent police reforms, rescinding Biden's executive order on policing, which currently restricts chokeholds and no-knock entries, meaning that he wants to re-enable the police use of chokeholds and no-knock entries. This rollback aims to grant law enforcement greater freedom in their methods, which some believe could lead to increased police militarization and use of force. Trump's proposals also include a significant expansion of the death penalty, promising broader applications beyond federal guidelines, and the re-incarceration of individuals on home confinement released during the COVID-19 pandemic. So those who were given house arrest or any other types of similar sentences like that may be readmitted back into jail or prison. These policies mark a stark contrast to recent reforms aimed at reducing mass incarceration and emphasize a strict punitive approach, potentially amplifying existing inequalities within the justice system. He has additionally suggested the use of federal troops and even military resources in high crime areas, echoing his past actions that supported local law enforcement access to military-grade equipment. Some critics argue that Trump's plan risks intensifying racial disparities and fails to address root causes of crime like poverty and limited access to mental health care, often seen as key factors for long-term public safety. His return to law and order rhetoric from previous decades has stirred debate, with many contending that these strategies prioritize punishment over rehabilitation and risk escalating tensions, particularly in marginalized communities. Now, one thing that I thought about is, Trump was already a rich man, a multi-billionaire before he ever became president. And one thing that he may have, which I'll also look into, is whether he has stakes in private prisons, whether he owns them himself or if he's invested into any, which could possibly be a reason for why he may want to readmit some criminals back into jail, or why he wants to take a maximum penalty stance on crime. All right, so let's move on to Trump's stance on civil rights and social justice. These are definitely going to be another area where we see some impact because he's been vocal about his opposition to critical race theory and DEI, or diversity-focused initiatives, because his stance is that they are divisive. Uh, During his last term, he restricted diversity training programs in federal agencies, which described as anti-American. If he reintroduces similar policies, it could limit conversations on racial equity within federal institutions and might influence policies in workplaces and schools nationwide. This could have a chilling effect on diversity and inclusion initiatives in places like schools, government, and corporations. Now, taking a closer look at what he means when he says critical race theory and why he is against it, his opposition to CRT and diversity-focused initiatives has drawn both support and criticism, in part because of how these policies intersect with contentious social issues. Trump and his supporters argue that CRT and diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives promote divisive ideologies by focusing heavily on race and historical injustices, which they believe encourages division rather than unity. In this view, both of those types of initiatives promote a narrative that undermines patriotic education by portraying the U.S. as fundamentally shaped by racial inequality and systemic racism. As a countermeasure, Trump has pledged to limit these frameworks in education, calling for schools to avoid divisive concepts and focus on a more traditional, unified narrative about American history. Critics, however, argue that Trump's opposition to CRT and DEI initiatives fails to address deep-rooted social inequalities and inequities and may actively prevent important discussions around race and discrimination. For example, the American Civil Liberties Union has noted that limiting DEI programs and censoring educational content on topics like systemic racism can undermine civil rights protections for marginalized groups and reduce educational workplace opportunities for those communities. Opponents claim that this approach dismisses ongoing racial issues and hinders efforts to address discrimination, effectively reinforcing existing inequalities. So his stance can also be viewed as polarizing because it aligns with broader ideological divides on how history and current social issues should be presented, especially in schools. Supporters see this approach as necessary to prevent indoctrination, while detractors believe it is an attempt to avoid addressing uncomfortable truths about inequality in America. All right, now let's talk about healthcare and social services. So while a lot of us might be young, we may have some in our families who are older than us, or AKA our elders, grandmothers, uncles, grandfathers, aunts, cousins, whoever you want to call it. You know, they may be more in need of beneficial health care policies and may need them sooner than we might. So while we might not see that as very important, we also have to keep in mind those around us who we care about who might need to take advantage of some of these things. So let's see what Donald Trump has planned when he takes office. So, considering that healthcare access is critical for Black Americans who disproportionately experience chronic health conditions, Trump has a history of opposing the Affordable Care Act, which expanded healthcare access for millions, including many in Black communities. A reviewed push to dismantle or weaken the ACA could result in less coverage and higher costs for those who rely on this support. Additionally, Trump has pushed to limit federal support for Medicaid, which many Black families use. So, if these cuts continue, healthcare access could become more challenging for Black Americans, particularly in states that haven't expanded Medicaid. So, if he were to return to office and implement his proposed healthcare policies, we could be significantly affected, given the policies he's supported previously and the changes that he advocates for. Under his first term, he attempted to dismantle the Affordable Care Act, and he introduced policies that made healthcare less accessible for lower income Americans. Demographics in which black communities are often disproportionately represented. The ACA expanded Medicaid and offered marketplace subsidies that allowed millions of black Americans to gain coverage, significantly reducing the uninsured rate within the community. This access led to more preventative care and early diagnosis for diseases like diabetes and certain cancers, which are prevalent in black populations. Trump's stance on healthcare includes rolling back Medicaid expansion, which could likely lead to increased numbers of uninsured black Americans, especially in states that have not already expanded Medicaid access independently of federal policy changes. In addition, Trump's policies included support for short-term health plans, which tend to provide less comprehensive coverage and exclude protections for pre-existing conditions. This shift would likely impact black Americans who statistically face higher rates of chronic conditions and potentially leading to inadequate health care coverage for those who rely on ACA protections for treatment. Moreover, Trump's approach to healthcare costs, while focused on price transparency and reducing drug prices, has not yet yielded significant systemic changes. Therefore, black Americans who may struggle with higher healthcare costs relative to their income could see limited relief under such a plan. So his administration's healthcare policies would likely create barriers to affordable and comprehensive healthcare for black communities, risking a setback in progress made in health equity under the ACA. All right, that was a relatively quick snapshot of what we can expect to see from Trump being our 47th president of the United States, and how his policies, stances, and initiatives could affect you and us as a community in America. So definitely continue to stay tuned. In the next couple of videos, I'll be going over, what to expect from his first 100 days as president. I'll also be going over how we can take advantage of his upcoming presidency when it comes to making ourselves more successful, being prepared for what's coming, and even when it comes to some business initiatives, investments that we can make, different things to look out for when it comes to preparing ourselves for our next steps in our own lives. Because there's definitely some ways that we can look to this presidency and move ahead with the times rather than getting caught up and being left in the past. All right, so comment, like the video, let me know which issues you're most concerned about, which issues you plan to pay the most attention to, what you expect from Trump as a leader in America. And thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next video. I'll see y'all there.